Good morning, friends. Welcome to Wake Up in the Word. Thanks for joining me this morning. Go to John chapter 18, grab a good cup of coffee, and let's look at a passage of Scripture that reveals the first of Peter's denials of Jesus Christ. Let's see what circumstances led to this situation and see if we can avoid falling into the same trap. As we go to John chapter 18, verse 15, this is, of course, right in the middle of the arrest and questioning of Jesus at the high priest's house. So what do we see? It says Simon Peter was following Jesus, as was another disciple. One of the other Gospels mentions that he followed afar off. In other words, not close where folks would recognize he's right in the middle of things. He's standing back, he's staying back, just trying to see what's going on. Not so much trying to get in the way or somehow arrange an escape. No, none of that's on his mind. He was following afar off. So it says he was following, as was another disciple. The implication being that it would have been one of those that had been with Jesus in the garden. That's why when we ask, who is this disciple? Most folks will say, well, it must have been John. Now, it doesn't say explicitly that it is John, and I can't tell you definitely it was John. M.O. Owens says probably it's John. That's about as far as we can go here. So one of the disciples is going with Peter, following at a distance to see what's going to happen with Jesus. Now it tells us about that disciple that he was an acquaintance of the high priest. So he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter remained standing outside by the door. So the other disciple, the one known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the girl who was the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. All right, so hang on. You've got someone who's a disciple of Jesus, who's known to the folks at the high priest's house, and they know he's a follower of Jesus, and it's not a big deal to them. Even knows the doorkeeper and intervenes so that she will allow Peter to come on into the courtyard with him. So, at this point, Peter has no problem being able to, in his own mind, perhaps he had the problem, but he should have just went ahead and said, look, remember what I said to Jesus? I'll go with you even to death. I'll never forsake you. He should have just said, yes, I'm a follower of this man, and admitted it at the beginning. It would have saved him all kinds of problems, but guess what? That was inconvenient. It might have caused a problem getting him in the door. And so it seemed like it was an okay compromise at the time. So hang on to that thought, because in this particular case, we've got to recognize it was the first little slip that allowed Peter to put himself in a position in which he almost inevitably is going to make the larger fall, so to speak. Now, as we see what Owen says about this, he says that Peter, though, was badly frightened. Yes, he's in the door, but you've got to remember what just happened to him and the other disciples in the garden. Remember, Peter is the one who had attacked the high priest's servant in the garden. So he was afraid he would be identified and prosecuted. It'd be safer not to be recognized as a follower of Jesus. Matter of fact, the subtlety of the girl's questions, it's mentioned here, it's implied in the Greek, but it's not so evident in some of the older English versions like the King James. She was actually trying to give Peter the benefit of the doubt. And so, when she first questions Peter, he had the opportunity to go ahead and stand for Christ in a very small sense. But because he was afraid, watch it, because he was afraid, he makes the first mistake. Isn't that what happens to us sometimes? Yeah, you're with that crowd of believers and somebody's laughing at someone else that's a Christian and for their Christian stand and says, yeah, aren't you glad you're not one of those? Yeah, I'm not one of that bunch over there. And we miss the opportunity to just make a simple stand for Jesus and to put things in perspective because we don't want to make the relationship uncomfortable. And then we find ourselves sliding off into oblivion before we know it. Now it says that, as Owens writes about this, among those warming themselves around the fire in the courtyard had to be some of the high priest's officials and officers who were taking part in the arrest. Peter found himself in the midst of some of the same men from whom he had fled a short time before. So by entering the high priest's palace, Peter placed himself where he would be most tempted to deny his Lord. He tried to make himself comfortable with the servants of Christ's enemies. Now, Peter's experience should immediately alert us to the weaknesses of our human nature and warn us to avoid temptation. Because as you see what happened next, it was easy for Peter to just do what was most expedient, he thought, to make himself comfortable around these people, the very people who had come to arrest Jesus. So the servant girl, it says in verse 17, who was the doorkeeper, said to Peter, "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" It's a simple enough, easy question. Look what Peter says. 3 words. I am not. I am not. Now the servants and the officials had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing there warming themselves, and Peter was standing with them, warming himself. It's a bad picture, isn't it? And I've heard a number of people jump on this and preach a 30-minute sermon on warming yourself by the world's fire. Yes, it's so easy to make yourself comfortable around people of the world and never open your mouth about your relationship to Jesus. That's what Peter was doing. He didn't want to be recognized. He didn't want to be noticed. He wanted to hide out for a while. Let me just find out what's going on. Isn't that reason enough for me to keep my mouth shut right now? I surely don't want to be pointed out in this crowd in a position that might, land me in jail in there with Jesus. No, we don't need that. Perhaps Peter was even thinking, hey, somebody's going to say, there's the dude with the sword. Where's Malchus? Where's your scar? Show us what happened to you when this guy pulled out his sword. No, at this point, Peter has turned into a coward. The man who seemed to be most courageous about following Jesus, even to death, has decided that he's got a big yellow streak down his back. But we do the same thing. Let's don't point at Peter as if we aren't to blame as well. I remember the old story of the young man who was asked what he was going to do on a Saturday, and he said to his dad, I'm going to go down and fish at the pond. I'm going fishing. Okay, said his dad. But son, I don't want you swimming down there alone. So don't go swimming. It's fine to go fishing, but stay out of the pond. Okay, Dad. Well, sometime later, Dad just wanted to go check on his young son and see how he was doing, see if he'd caught any fish, and, just be Dad, find out what your kids are doing. So he goes down by the pond, and there, laying over on the rocks, a pair of swimming trunks, laying nice, neatly folded while the boy's fishing. So Dad goes by and says, son, I thought I told you not to go swimming in the pond. What are you doing bringing swim trunks down here when I told you not to go swimming? He said, well, Dad, I wasn't going to go swimming. I just brought those in case I got tempted. In case I got tempted? Yeah. And with that thought in mind, I wonder how many times you and I set ourselves up and bring the very provisions into our life just in case we get tempted, so that it makes it easier to fall. Oh, friends, listen. We need to recognize it's much better to stand up and speak up for Jesus. First and foremost, fly your colors openly. Let people know that you're a believer in Jesus. Don't be ashamed of him. It'll be a whole lot easier when you get set up with the world's people, around the world's fire. Look, there's nothing wrong with hanging around with people in the world. We do it all the time. You have to do it if you're going to reach out to people in the world. But when you go in a stealth relationship, looking for ways that you can not tell people that you're a believer, then what happens when the opportunity comes and the door opens? Do you have to backtrack? You don't want to have to walk back things you've said before. That got our own president in trouble this past week multiple times. Listen, friends, you don't have to walk back something you've said. Say what you mean up front and mean what you say. And then you won't end up like Peter, having already denied that he knows Jesus. Now, if he acknowledges him, he's going to have to go back and explain why he lied the first time. Friends, anytime you tell a little lie, it just sets you up for bigger lies to build on the small lie. You find yourself trying to cover up for what you did in the beginning. Folks, just be straight up front and don't get caught up in this little slippery slope that Peter did that allowed him to soon find himself falling flat on his face. Well, I hope those are little words that may help you through maybe one of those teeny tiny small temptations you may face today. And if you avoid that one, it might keep you out of a bigger mess. Well, thanks for joining me this morning. We'll wake up in the Word tomorrow and look at what happened when Peter really got in trouble. And some folks say, that's why I keep my mouth shut. I don't open my mouth because, look, it got Peter in trouble. No, there's nothing wrong with opening your mouth as long as you understand the implication of the words coming out of your mouth. We'll see how that works tomorrow. So grab a friend and join us tomorrow as we, every day this week, wake up in God's Word.